The magazine, The Adirondack Explorer, marked a milestone this past year. 25 years as a nonprofit independent magazine and website dedicated to covering the Adirondacks with a team of journalists who dig deeply into important issues like climate change, the environment, and the vitality of Adirondack communities. And Gwendolyn Craig covers environmental policy in the Adirondack Park for the Explorer. Not only stories about the decision makers, the New York State Legislature and Adirondack Park Agency, but also stories about the people and places that their policies affect. Welcome, it's nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Along with covering the legislature and APA and the many issues before them that affect the Adirondack Park, you also cover environmental issues in the park. And one of them in recent months has been the discovery of a black fungus growing in the town of Mariah in Essex County. The fungus has been spreading to homes, cars, even traffic signs in the town, in the business park, and warehouses owned by Whistle Pig Whiskey. And you've been following this for several months now, and you've talked with neighbors, you've talked with state biologists, with the DEC. What are they saying about this?
Yeah, we're finding that these neighbors who've lived in Mariah for decades are just starting to see this crop up. They're really frustrated, and they've been trying to get Whistle Pig to acknowledge the fungus in the first place and clean their homes is really what they want. And a couple of them have had their homes cleaned by the company. The company is still saying that no one's proven that this fungus is the result of their operations. And reading about whiskey fungus, it is naturally occurring in the environment. It's not the fungus from necessarily the distillery. It needs ethanol to grow, and so when you are in the environment you won't necessarily see it, but it gets fed by what's called the angel's share. It's the evaporation of the whiskey during the aging process, and so that's when you start to see it actually cropping up on trees and siding and roofs, and as you were saying, the stop sign is sort of that iconic image. So that's really what's happening here.
What has the DEC told you? Do they have no doubt that it's being caused by the whiskey that's being stored there, that it's coming from this facility?
They are certain that it is whiskey fungus. What's tough in the reporting so far is their laboratory capabilities are not using the traditional methods to identify this whiskey fungus, and so that's why Whistle Pig Whiskey is now saying, well, you haven't actually proven to us that this is whiskey fungus coming from us. But we've been in touch with a professor at the University of Toronto, James Scott, who studies this. He's sort of this international one-man expert who's been quoted in all the articles about it, who said it is whiskey fungus. And really there's no, if there were other distilleries in the area or some sort of ethanol escaping from somewhere, you could say that maybe it wasn't from Whistle Pig alone. But this is really, when you have thousands of whiskey barrels, as the state is saying, this is really what's causing it to grow in quantities that are beyond what would be normal in any other environment.
There's no threat as far as public health, which I guess is good. There's no danger, but it's obviously a nuisance, it's obviously unsightly, and neighbors want to get rid of it.
Right, and they're not all convinced that there isn't a public health threat, and when there's not a lot of studies done, and the State Department of Health said they aren't concerned about it being a public health threat. Really what we're hearing from most state health authorities, there's a report often cited from Indiana that says it isn't really a public health concern, but it's definitely a nuisance.
The state has reached out to Whistle Pig. What's been the response?
So in November they took samples. We were waiting for the results. Neighbors were getting a little antsy, having not heard what this could be, if it was in fact whiskey fungus. And then we heard, just in time for this article, basically that the state was saying it is whiskey fungus. So they've now basically asked Whistle Pig Whiskey to come up with a mitigation plan. And in response, Whistle Pig said, we don't need to come up with a mitigation plan because you haven't proven to us that we're the cause. They still don't believe they're the cause of the fungus, that it is naturally occurring, and that they don't have a way to control their ethanol vapor. There is no viable solution in their mind. They essentially aren't claiming responsibility. They did offer, without any specificity, to clean additional homes, but we have yet to see how many they're willing to do. We're seeing homes as far as nearly a mile away from the facility, which was quite further than they were originally planning to clean. They were looking at a 300-yard radius. So it remains to be seen whether they'll wash a few more homes in the area.
Is there anything the state can do? Can the state enforce any rules or regulations? Are there any consequences that the company could face if they refuse to take care of the problem?
Yeah, we're now. It seems there's like 3 prongs to this. One is they're permitted under the Adirondack Park Agency. The Adirondack Park Agency has not been as forthcoming about their investigation. They've confirmed they are investigating the whiskey fungus, but it seems there could be some sort of enforcement action on the part of the permits. We've spoken to a couple of environmental groups who believe that there's language in their permits that would keep them from emitting and affecting other people's property. The DEC also has regulations that prohibit air emissions impacting other people's property, and it seems that the DEC at least has said to us they're looking at that as a possible way to enforce something. This mitigation plan and back and forth appears to be sort of their first step in hoping they'll comply with, but we'll see what the end result is. But we also know from records requests that the DEC is in talks with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and in those back and forths, the EPA has provided other instances where they've enforced the Clean Air Act in instances of a distillery having ethanol emissions create a nuisance to a neighborhood. And so, and in that back and forth, the EPA suggested there could be upcoming changes to the Federal Clean Air Act that would address ethanol emissions. That would definitely be a long-term process, but it is very interesting that there's seems to be this back and forth between our state government and our federal government about how to handle these cases of whiskey fungus.
You've also been reporting on the request before the APA to allow an herbicide to be used to treat milfoil on Lake George, a chemical that's been used before in another lake within the Adirondack Park. So if it's been used before, why the controversy this time?
Well, it's been a controversy for a while because Lake George actually was originally permitted for it. So this is the second, we're seeing the second iteration of this permit coming before the Adirondack Park Agency. The APA has approved 7 of these permits. The homeowners around the lake and the lake advocates have come out really against this. Lake George is also a drinking water body. Many people pull water directly from the lake, so it's not going through your local water treatment plant. They really are concerned with this, especially because of earlier this year, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture came out with a report that said the active ingredient of this specific herbicide is a PFAS, which is a kind of forever chemical. That's really leading the battle cry at the moment for stopping the use of this herbicide.
Well, thank you. Once again, you can read Gwen's reporting on the APA, how much funding the legislature is sending to the Adirondacks, and more by reading the Adirondack Explorer magazine or visiting their website. Gwen, thank you so much for coming and seeing us. We appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thank you.
The May-June issue, out now, also includes stories on the challenges of securing consistent funding for climate change research in the Adirondacks, how the World University Games ended up costing the state of New York millions of dollars, and the cover story on the boom in the number of hikers becoming 46ers.